Here's some stuff I dealt with while browsing the internet in May 2022. First, very popular not safe for work artist Sakami-chan decided to draw this season's darling Anya Forager as a 21-year-old. AniTuber Neuralities released a video where she expressed disappointment and reservation that Urabuchi and Shaft had not made the canon couple of Madoka and Homura explicitly gay. The global cryptocurrency market took a massive hit as the failure of Terra Luna played out in record speed, losing some $40 billion for its holders. And I had the best meal of my life at Banana Leaf in Philadelphia, having some chow kway to. And I hear you thinking right now, I know you're probably thinking that there's no way, Clear and Sweet, you'll be able to connect all four of those random occurrences into some type of statement about the consumption of fiction or the philosophies of a long-dead French psychoanalyst or a work of modern Japanese media criticism and analysis. But boy, are you wrong.
We need to talk about something interesting.
Bet you feel stupid right now, huh? Disclaimer time, this is gonna get real spicy in a couple ways, and I don't want you to go out there with any type of misinterpretations. I'm making this video specifically because I'm seeing again and again more of an uptick in people on social media or in my sphere that don't quite understand differing modes of consumption. If you're already quite familiar with the philosophies of Lacan, or the concepts of multiple realities, or of course if you have indeed read the book Beautiful Fighting Girl by Saito Tamaki, I might be rehashing some things for you. And of course I'm representing and reinterpreting these gentlemen's philosophies, so I necessarily need to reduce them in some way. You should go to the sources if you want a more comprehensive take. These are just some of the ideas they present that I find the most interesting or meaningful. Finally, a lot of this is tied up in sexuality, so those of you with more delicate dispositions, well, watch the entire video. You are the exact demographic that does need to understand what's going on in Beautiful Fighting Girl. And indeed, in the mind of the otaku masses who are willing to pervert and corrupt nearly everything that you hold sacrosanct. But before we get to the fun stuff, we have to start at a very boring place, and that is reality. That is reality as it exists in the physical meat space wherein you can go out and touch grass. This to you and to me and to literally everybody else on Earth is very easy to identify as being real because it is tangible in a physical way. In Beautiful Fighting Girl, Tamaki calls this genjitsu, the Japanese word for reality. That's pretty easy to understand. Let's move on to conceptual realities, like say a sports team. I'm sure you know many people who are incredibly into soccer and football as a reality separate from real reality. There's a legacy behind the New England Patriots or the Manchester United or what have you. Every single fan you'll ever meet will tell you about the aspect of family that comes along with buying into that reality. Your sports clubs become concepts, not just businesses or 11 men on a field running around. And there's something real to get emotionally involved in as a consumer of that reality, and indeed by consuming, become in some way a producer of the reality. The metaphysical nature of the sports club is inherent and obvious, I think, to many of us. What about then the metaphysical relationship of a hobby such as cooking or rock climbing? The act of cooking or rock climbing do not in and of themselves create this type of reality. They're simply acts that you do. However, they are hobbies, they are cultures, they are subcategories of people that invest in themselves. And there are narratives of cooks and rock climbers and their gears and their accomplishments. Even in hobbies that don't necessarily breed narratives, you can still find this type of narrative come to be, simply because humans like to think about things in that way. What about the metaphysical nature of some video game or esport? In the same way, of course, fiction can as well. Look at all the fans of literally any narrative or media at all whatsoever. From 50 Shades of Grey to your Star Wars to your ancient mythology, every single thing. Every single media property in and of itself has its own fandom, and by having its own fandom, people that read, appreciate, consume, and then internalize and share that with other people, it has its own separate reality. The Lacanian idea is that these separate realities are no more or less real than each other, and indeed no more or less real than the Genjutsu, than the physical meat space outside. Real life is just a reality that we're all forced to participate in at least a little bit. What if we talk about the concept of a country? Malaysia exists, right? You may not be aware of it, but the global community has collectively overwhelmingly agreed that Malaysia exists. Now, for me, an American living on the east coast of the United States, Malaysia functionally did not exist until I had the meal at the Malaysian restaurant. I've never been there, I've never interacted with anyone from Malaysia in my entire life. Or if I did, their Malaysianness wasn't a factor in who they were. It became functionally irrelevant because it didn't exist for me. This of course doesn't change the fact that the Malay people have been inhabiting their area in Southeast Asia for hundreds or thousands of years. But I bring up this specifically to show to you as an example that some reality, even though it exists in meat space, doesn't necessarily have to exist for other people that are not aware of it, or that it does not affect. Lacan digs further into this with examples and terms of the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary, and how this idea reflects back on the propagation of self-identities. But for our purposes, just keep in mind this idea. We as human beings navigate through our existence by defining and shaping ourselves using the realities that we choose to engage with. In our modern media space, there are ongoing narratives, ongoing realities derived from collective shared narratives that other people deem true. Countries, such as they are, and cultures are only one example of the sociology of humans forming groups that they believe exist, and by doing so, making them exist. Such is the element for some Ponzi scheme like Terra Luna. Everything works fine when people accept that Terra Luna exists and has no problems and is a stablecoin, but as soon as the confidence dries up, then the idea is worthless. This idea of belief creating something is of course something that you can find in many philosophies and ideas over the course of history, so instead let's get back to the idea of realities by me asking you a question here. And now 9 minutes into the video, let's turn it finally towards anime. What would you think if I told you honestly and earnestly that Sailor Moon Usagi Tsukino had more of an impact on my life and who I am as a person, and is more real to me than the country of Malaysia? That's not too far of a leap, is it? What if I say Madoka Magica is more real than the Boston Red Sox to me? Again, not that hard to understand, or not that hard to imagine a Red Sox fan who feels exactly the opposite. What if I say anime as a whole was more real than my parents were? I would imagine the case would be the same for some of you as well. For certain people in certain circumstances, there's more truth to be found in some fictional media than there is in any type of genjutsu hard touch grass reality, or any various relationship you may have formed. Now you lump on top of that the idea that we are in the information age and a lot of the barriers to consuming media are coming down technically, and you can learn all about Malaysia or the peoples from across the world who do have their own stories and their own narratives and their own groups that they form and they share, and you can connect to them, or at least, at the very least, be aware of their realities. In the same way, we're able to connect in a way that we haven't before with people across the internet who share and buy into fictional narratives the same way we do. So let's move a bit away from the Lacanian ideas of realities now, and instead go into a bit of post-modernity, and infuse those Lacanian ideals back in. We have any number of great avenues to explore because this idea of consumption, of a dissolution evolution of the standard grand narrative of fan engagement, transformation, and retcons has been the MO of anime and anime consumerism for the last 50 years. And anime as a whole has gotten very weird with it. My hypothesis is that it's bleeding over to Western fans and Zoomers who don't have the background that would be necessary to deal with multiple realities surrounding one fictional character. So I guess it falls on me to be your first time on the internet guide and show you how this all works. So let's use one of Tamaki's interviews to explain the situation. In the second chapter of Beautiful Fighting Girl, Tamaki tells the story secondhand of a fan talking about another fan. In a certain computer chat room, the fan says, "There was one devoted fan of a particular Beautiful Fighting Girl manga who always said that erotic parodies not only defiled the characters in the work, but were also a monstrous crime that hurt the feelings of the author." So even when he went to Comiket, he was afraid to walk around the exhibits. He said he was afraid that if he happened to see people selling an erotic parody fan magazine based on a work he liked, he wouldn't be able to keep himself from grabbing them in the heat of the moment and calling them a bunch of pigs. The fan telling this story emphasizes that he is in the minority with these views. The storyteller goes on to say that this fan eventually gave up his viewpoints, and there was one particular encounter that made him surrender his crusade against the pornography. One time at a convention, he encountered a pornographic comic of a manga series of which he was a huge fan, precisely the kind of thing that he would have torn to pieces in a fit of rage. But he wasn't able to do that in this case because the creator of the fan magazine was the creator of the original work. The fact was that the original author, who he had supposed would have been hurt by the heartless otaku who defiled her creation, and she happened to be a woman, had actually created the pornographic version and was marketing it. He says that this came as such a shock that he completely changed his view of the world. That's the end of the story as I'll leave it, but there are some insights that are particularly poignant as to the feelings behind that. Now, I don't want to sit here and get up on my pro-pornography soapbox, but everyone draws porn. I literally have Diana X Akko fan art on my wall drawn by Yo-Yo Shinari, which I guess means it's not even fan art. The sexualization of the heroines in our anime and manga, and I say heroines too, but that's not to say people who are attracted to men aren't sexually charged and able to consume sexual versions of the characters. I mean, look at that Eren Yeager statue. Nice cock on that mass murderer there. But it's just to say that sexuality is the easiest vector to peel off a fictional character. Nearly everyone in the world experiences sexuality and desire and lust. If we didn't, we wouldn't be here as a species. The Egyptian hieroglyphs for male genitalia are in your computer's Unicode. You can type them right now like any other letter. This is just me stating the obvious because apparently some people need to hear that Rule 34 is, was, and always will be part of human culture. The interesting part here, and what Tamaki gets into in Beautiful Fighting Girl, among a lot of other things, is the idea that otaku are able to hold multiple versions of a character in their mind. That we can somehow appreciate a sexually charged Rei Ayanami who is completely different from the Rei Ayanami that appears in the work of Evangelion. And yet we still understand that Rei Ayanami is Rei Ayanami, for whatever that means. Of course, Evangelion would latch onto this and go in a number of different ways talking about that consumption. Just imagine the Rei Ayanami you see in episode 26, or the Rei Ayanami you see in the rebuilds, or how the show destroys that concept of lusting for Rei Ayanami. Because Rei Ayanami, as she graces the cover of this book, is the poster child for consumption in the anime sphere. Rei Ayanami is such a blank slate that she can be whoever you want her to be at that moment, whether that's divine, whether that's aggressive, whether that's subtle, whether that's sexual, or whether that's completely chaste and powerless. What do you want from Rei Ayanami? Because it's very, very easy to turn her into that. But listen, I want to emphasize this before we move on to other things. All of these Rei Ayanamis, which is funny because that's the plot of Evangelion, but all of these Rei Ayanamis are, in and of themselves, different, and yet simultaneously the same character. Beautiful Fighting Girl makes a point to say that the consumption of the character in one way does not destroy, nor harm, nor affect the consumption of the character in any other way. This is the disassociation of the otaku, why they are able to masturbate for Rei Ayanami and then still simultaneously cry for her. Well, maybe not like simultaneously immediately, but you know what I mean. Here's Unit 1 doing PUBG mobile emotes. If that doesn't describe and embody the disassociation of anime and manga properties across different mediums, then honestly I don't know what would. Let's look at yet another meta-narrative example from Ano's friend Ikahara. You may not know this, you probably do via osmosis, or you may be deeply familiar with this, but there is a lot of Sailor Moon pornography, and there was certainly a lot back when Ikuni worked on it. This is just a theory that I have, but I think that Ikahara, having worked on Sailor Moon and being one of those people that didn't really understand the multiple modes of consumption of his characters, stuck a middle finger up to the fans who consume the characters in this way when he had the creative liberty to do so in Revolutionary Girl Utena. Spoilers for episode 33 of Utena, but it does contain a scene of rape. Not a violent one, but a very famous one and a very impactful one. Not only that, but it contains a number of shots that are positioned and shot from the perspective of the rapist. The logical conclusion is that Ikahara is deliberately trying to place the viewer in the point of view and the mindset of the sexual abuser. The entire episode is all about ogling Utena as she appears so childlike, so innocent, and so attractive, and then turning that back on the viewer and making them feel so incredibly uncomfortable of their voyeuristic consumption and by proxy their rape of Utena. Ikahara shows her off-model and defiled after the act. And it's not so subtle, the meta-narrative angle on this episode. You want to sexualize Utena, Ikahara says? Well, fine, here you go. Here's Utena sexualized. Of course, that's just one reading, and there's a more literal thematic point to that episode as well. But it's yet another example of this kind of late-stage awareness of the media creators understanding how their characters are consumed. While it's trivially easy to write a character or present a character in a way that invites this type of consumption, just look at literally any anime. Literally any anime. Using it to betray the viewer and cause them to have some sort of self-reflection is just a masterful directing trick. And also, not coincidentally, why I'm a large fan of the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. These examples show the postmodern struggle of the content creator when they grapple with the impossibility of maintaining control of their creations and the consumption therein. But I want to emphasize something here. The question isn't should or should not these characters be consumed in this way. They are, and that doesn't change. You're wasting your breath if you say that fan art, that fan fiction, or yes, pornography, containing whatever content you deem objectionable personally, shouldn't exist. It's going to whether you like it or not. If there are two people who engage in that reality and find value in that, then it's going to exist. No one's holding your feet to the fire saying you need to engage with it. My intention with this YouTube channel is not to get up and virtue signal what you should or shouldn't believe is right. Instead, the purpose here is to make this known and erode away the naivete and the indignation. Humans have, will, and will always consume fiction and realities as narratives. And it's a trivially easy skill to learn to embrace these different realities without compromising them. If you want my take, the human brain's ability to juggle these separate realities is one of the most beautiful and inspiring things about being human. You can define yourself by which realities you choose to engage with and choose to propagate. Media now, through mimetic mutation, through the internet, through our shared consumption of these properties, becomes something transformative. You can make a story with something as simple as an image macro. Black Rock Shooter or Katawa Shoujo were literally just doodles before fans transformed them into their own codified properties. And so we've come at last to the final thing that I am addressing through the lens of Beautiful Fighting Girl, and that's the idea that we somehow need Gen Urobuchi to tell us that Madoka and Homura are gay. Now, don't get me wrong, Gen Urobuchi has the loudest single megaphone on which to broadcast his ideas in the Madoka community, but that doesn't mean he has the definitive voice. I think it's very clear how much Madoka was defined by the fandom, and just about every aspect of Rebellion and the fan service contained therein is a great example of that. And from being immersed in the Madoka fandom for the last decade, I can tell you that the prevailing and overwhelming perspective from the community is that Homura is sexually attracted to Madoka, Kyoko and Sayaka are sexually attracted to each other, and Mami unfortunately usually gets left with the bald fat guys. Of course, this doesn't mandate anything, and those are just the most prevailing readings that I've seen. You can have variations on everything, your crack ships, your fanfics where they do interstellar travel because of the advancements of magical girl technology and fight aliens and shit. Just like you can have your Rei Ayanami BMX trick figure and reality sit right next to your Rei Ayanami telling you it's going to be okay figure and reality. It's an essentially purposeless exercise to try and have any definitive version of one character. Admittedly, I understand the desire for representation. I also understand that it's a little bit hard when you first encounter some of the less digestible aspects or realities of some of your favorite characters. Ones that you decide that you certainly wouldn't engage with. But that's the point. That is why I'm making this video. That is why I'm trying to help you expose yourself to the idea that everything's out there if you go looking for it. At the end of the day, humanity understands its world by consuming its fiction. We understand our world and ourselves by engaging with these narratives that we collectively create. I think once you understand this, then you can move on to a place where the question isn't this indignation and this shock of these aspects of these characters being interpreted in this way. Because there's going to be as many interpretations and realities as there are people that engage with that reality, times 1,000 or as many as your imagination can conjure. And it's, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful things when two separate human beings both understand a reality in the same way and share it with each other. What that content is only shows you how connected you are to that other person. Let me end with a bit of reading from Beautiful Fighting Girl. Hardcore otaku have their unique stance towards fiction and are able to enjoy anime, for example, on multiple levels. To put this in the terms I used earlier, they're able to switch freely between levels of fictional context. As I mentioned earlier, they see reality as a kind of fiction. Since this means they do not necessarily privilege reality, it can easily be mistaken for an avoidance of reality. So while otaku do not in any way confuse fiction with reality, they are uninterested in setting fiction and reality against each other. If anything, they are able to find reality equally in both fiction and reality, or genjitsu. What would an otaku do if a story he liked ended badly? In fact, we have an excellent example of such a case, Neon Genesis Evangelion, which created a whole societal phenomenon as a result of its ending. Until the last half of the series, it was a giant robot anime of unprecedented sophistication. But the problem came with the last episode, when the protagonist suddenly started to talk at great length about his own inner struggles, leading to an ending which he experienced inner salvation. Most of the fans were furious with this ending. But did they criticize creator Hideki Anno directly? Well, of course, there were many who did. But then, at the same time, huge numbers of fans began to write their own Eva stories. And this was certainly the proper otaku response. They did not see the author as absolute. They were not just fans, but connoisseurs, critics, and authors themselves. This blurring of the distinction between producer and consumer is another characteristic of the otaku. Tamaki closes the book by saying, "I fully affirm the otaku's way of living. I would never try to lecture them about getting back to reality. They know reality better than anyone." Thank you again for listening to my rant. Thank you again for finding some meaning in understanding these concepts and dealing with stuff that's really honestly pretty hard to wrap your mind around. I do have a Patreon if you'd like to support me making more videos like this, or please do subscribe and check out the playlist that I have analyzing various shows like Adolescence of Utena and Madoka Magica. You can also follow me on Twitter at clearandsweet, and you can always send me DMs of your favorite NTR doujins. Okay, bye! Also, I learned while making this, an artist I had commissioned for my Madoka series who drew this, Sayaka here, was of course from Malaysia. Shoutouts to General Fang. But again, doesn't that just prove my point? Malaysia doesn't exist until it's a property imbued upon someone. It's kind of the observer's universe, the quantum mechanics of the fandom.